Hey folks, welcome to the final Unity Campfire, and I should point out the first Unity bonfire. And the reason we're calling it a bonfire is that we expect that by the end of the evening we will have burned our bras, our draft cards, and the bridges that would lead us back to all of our kin and friends. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our guests today, who are James Lindsey, who is an American-born author, a mathematician, presumably also American-born, and a political commentator, and it says here, recreational cliff diver. I did not know that about you, James. We also
Only
have...
on Tuesdays, Brett. Only on Tuesdays.
Only Tuesday. It's not Tuesday. I don't know why it's on here.
Yeah, it's weird.
We are also joined by Jesse Singal, who is the co-host of the very popular Blocked and Reported podcast with Katie Herzog, and a contributing writer at New York Magazine. Jesse James, welcome to you.
Thank you. And professional cliff diver, by the way.
Oh, you're a professional. Well, I guess it makes sense.
One up on James, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is going to be a little different than our usual campfire. The election is right around the corner, and of course this election is proceeding so oddly in the sense that so many of us have voted already using mail-in ballots. Wow. What are you showing us?
I did it in person.
You voted in person.
So did I, yeah. I actually did
in Tennessee.
Did you vote in person in disguise?
No. Well, I had a mask on. They make you do that now.
They do. They do.
I disguised myself as James Lindsey and told everyone in line I was voting for Biden, actually.
All right.
That's right.
That seems like a mixed metaphor. So here's the plan. I have promised to reveal my vote and its meaning tonight, and then you both are going to reveal your votes, which are, I believe, well known based on what you've written and said, and you're going to defend them, and then we'll have a discussion about where we find ourselves. So, as I introduce my vote, let me say that I have come to take voting very, very seriously, and not in the context of imagining that my vote is ever likely to change the outcome of a significant election. But I've recognized there's a different kind of power in it, and that recognition came most profoundly in 2016. In 2016, I was not well known at all, but I had for years thought very carefully about what vote I was going to cast, and 2016 turned out to be the most important vote in my life so far, probably the most important one I ever will cast. I cast it for Bernie Sanders in 2016 as a write-in, and then that vote became very important later when Evergreen melted down and I emerged into the public eye, and Tucker Carlson asserted that I must be a liberal who voted for Hillary Clinton, and I told him that I couldn't bring myself to do that and that I had voted for Bernie Sanders, which put me into an odd category. It caused a lot of people, especially people on the right, who could not stomach the thought of Hillary Clinton, who, in spite of the fact that Bernie Sanders was obviously left of Clinton, found my having opted out of the standard options in the Democratic Party somehow endearing and made me more understandable to them. So I take it very seriously. And in this case, what I did is I voted for Tulsi Gabbard, again, as a write-in. And the reason I did that was that I thought she was the most forthright member of the Democratic field. I also felt that she had been very badly treated by Hillary Clinton in particular, who had gone to great lengths to portray her as somehow disloyal to the nation. And all of these things, I think, tell us something about where we are in history. And so, although Tulsi Gabbard is obviously in no position to win, I do think that a vote of conscience for her was the right thing to do. It was her due, and to the extent that it provides me an opportunity to point to her patriotism and her bravery as the election looms, I think it's worthwhile. Okay, so let's, shall we start with you, Jesse? Do you want to tell us what you did in this election?
Yeah, a couple days ago, I early voted in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. I voted for Joe Biden. This was not a difficult choice for me. During the primary, I was sort of a Warren Sanders type. I thought both of them were sort of leftier candidates more concerned with the issues I'm most concerned about. I was very unenthusiastic about Biden. I thought there was a real chance of him becoming an troubled candidate for the same reasons Hillary Clinton was, just sort of another bland neoliberal older person. As it turned out, I was wrong. He proved to be quite electable. Um, you know, on October 28th, 2020, I don't know if I can even relitigate all the reasons to be against Donald Trump if you're a liberal-minded person. There's just his dossier is so thick. There are so many problems with every aspect of him from both a personality and a policy level. Biden is not a perfect candidate. I just think he's so much better that it isn't a close call. And I know one of your guys' main focus is sort of wokeness or excesses on the left, excesses among progressives. No one can accuse me of sort of ignoring the bad stuff coming from my side, but Biden is not a quote-unquote woke candidate. Biden won because of a bunch of black, slightly more socially conservative voters in states like South Carolina. He beat out Elizabeth Warren, who was vying for the woke vote more than anyone, and Bernie Sanders, who I don't view as particularly woke, but who's more in that direction. So I just think if your worry was that the Democratic Party is sort of drifting too far to the left, and I know James specifically has mentioned that worry, this was a good outcome. You got the center-left guy who is much more moderate than the alternative. So this isn't an easy choice for me. Sorry, isn't a difficult choice for me. And part of the reason I'm coming on is I'd like to convince your audience that this shouldn't be a difficult choice for them either.
Wonderful. I think the best thing to do is to have James tell us what he did, and then we can all tell each other why we each did the wrong thing. So, James, you're up.
I cannot agree with Jesse. My decision and my vote was not an easy decision. It was a very reticent, very slow decision to have been made that sort of started well over 6 months ago, at least. I voted for Trump. I voted for Donald Trump yesterday. I said several days ago on Twitter that I intended to, and I did. It was a slightly surreal moment doing that. I said that I was going to do it unhappily. I don't know that I'm particularly happy or unhappy about my vote. I do think it was necessary. I think it's very interesting that, at least for Jesse and I, if I perceived what he said correctly, and possibly for you as well, Bret, that we're in a position where nobody's voting for. You maybe, I guess, voted for, but you voted for somebody that's technically not on the ballot, whereas Jesse and I both voted against. And I think the majority of Americans are likely to be voting against in this election. So I didn't vote against Biden per se, and I didn't vote for Trump per se. I voted against not even the Democratic Party, the movement on the left that controls the Democratic Party. And that's very important. It's a very important distinction, because I do think that Biden perhaps is a moderate Democrat. I don't know for sure how principled he is, and I think there are excellent reasons to doubt his level of principle at this point. But more importantly, I don't think that even the principled moderate liberals in the Democratic Party have any control over the tiger that they've chosen to ride. And that tiger is going to do what it always does. I was voting for who has control over establishing appointments in the administrative state. That's what I was voting about. This wasn't even about the legislature to me. This wasn't about who's in office, because I see Joe Biden as a character that's very much like George Bridges in the Evergreen saga. It'll be interesting to talk to you about that, Bret. What I see as a permissive administrator, and what I see repeatedly from the woke movement, is that when you have a small number of very dedicated activists, and you have a permissive administrator, you have a catastrophe on your hands. Are those Obama's helicopters coming for you?
No, that's a delivery truck.
So
go ahead. Finish that out.
Just to wrap up, I do think that the way that woke works is that it fills administrative bureaucracies where policy is set largely unaccountably, and where it's very hard to get rid of. And I do think that what we will see, setting aside all of the catastrophe around the court, setting aside all of the odd stuff that's going on around this unfolding but hidden scandal which the significance of this Hunter Biden scandal isn't the scandal itself, or maybe parts of it are. It's that the media is doing everything it can not to allow it to be heard and debated, which is extremely concerning because the power has to be held to account. That's the point of having a free press. And when I look at the way that the woke movement tends to control and agitate that which it wants to move, when you have a permissive administrator, you're up against a disaster. And I think they have the aim, as we heard from the Equity Council in January in Washington, of establishing at least 50 years of woke as the standard operating procedure of the United States, which is a disaster.
All right, so here's my suggestion. I think at some level the right way to do this is for us, to lay out some ground rules. I don't think these ground rules really need to be stated between us. I think I know each of you. I've broken bread with each of you in person, and I don't have any fear whatsoever that we are going to be left with bad blood between us. But I do think the nation is in terrible jeopardy, and that jeopardy comes from the fact that we are actually in an era where we have not just begun, but have gotten to a very deep level of dehumanizing each other. And I think all of us are concerned about what may unfold in the aftermath of the election, maybe especially if the aftermath is slow to emerge, if there is a reversal of its course, which might well happen by very natural reasons. And so in any case, let's just say, I think we need to talk about the hazard of the things each of us have done with respect to this election. And so those who didn't vote for Biden, I think, can take Jesse to account. Those who didn't vote for Trump can take James to account. And you guys can both take me to account for what I've done. But let's just recognize that at the end of the day, we each know how the others have cast their votes, and it's not personal. We recognize that we are Americans above all, that we are caught in a bind, and that we have each made a decision of conscience, and that at least has to be respected. All right. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers to that.
Can I respond to something James said, or did you want to do the format a little bit differently?
We can do this. I trust you both. I'm not concerned about how this goes, so we can do it however you like. If you'd like to start out, Jesse, you're welcome to do it.
So when I'm visiting my parents outside Boston now, and during part of the drive here, I listened to James's explanation he posted as a podcast about why he made this decision, and I think I really disagree with his political analysis. This idea that sort of if you give wokeness an inroad, it's like this cancer that just takes over an organization. Biden's constituency he has a lot of non-woke people in there. And James had said in his podcast that like lefty parties are becoming unelectable because of wokeness. What happened in 2018 when the Democrats roared back to take control of the House was a bunch of moderate candidates won. They won in white suburbs. These are people who were sort of former CIA analysts, folks like that, the last people in the world you'd expect to sort of spread wokeness. And there's so many examples of, in Minneapolis over the summer, after George Floyd's killing, there was suddenly all this talk of defunding the police or abolishing the police. Where is that a few months later? Once that idea spread to normies, we subsequently got polling showing that the position of reducing the size of the Minneapolis police force at all is 15 points underwater among Black Minneapolis. Is it Minneapolitans? I can never get this one right. It's very complicated. Residents of Minneapolis. A lot of these are incredibly unpopular positions, and I'm not going to give the people who want to abolish the police power they didn't earn by pretending that, if they start advocating for this in Minneapolis, we're inevitably not going to have a Minneapolis police force. That's not how it works. I think James is much too fatalistic about this, and it causes these sort of blinders that lead to the bad decision of voting for Trump, frankly. A lot of it, like the Democratic base is mostly not like woke college students. It's a pretty small fraction of it.
Oh, that's a tiny fraction. However, the power of that fraction is absolutely immense. And I would point out that inside the argument that you just deployed is the seeds of its undoing, because the fact is the dismantling of police forces is well underway, even though a majority of Americans are far too smart to think it's a good idea. So somehow the power of people demanding the defunding, or what they actually turn out to mean, the abolition of police, the fact that they are demanding that violently in the streets is enough to actually set the policy in motion, in spite of the fact that it's wildly unpopular. So that seems to me.
But in Minneapolis, it's clearly not happening. There was an article in the Times where they talked to local politicians who immediately started backing off of that when they got backlash. Where is this actually happening?
Well, lots of things are happening, including, if I understood it correctly, I read just yesterday that in Seattle, the city council is considering making drug addiction and poverty into viable defenses against all misdemeanor crimes. Things that
but hold on, we should keep this concrete, because my argument is that there isn't any risk of any major police force being abolished or seriously defunded to the point where we should be worried. I thought you said there's examples of that where it's already happened.
Well, my point is it is happening, and it is happening both through official mechanisms and unofficial mechanisms. The fact is,
but what does that mean, unofficial? I mean,
that's how wokeness works.
Yeah, that's how wokeness works.
Wokeness changes the context in which the words mean what they mean. Wokeness changes the meanings of the words themselves. And when you, for example, have the concept, for example, of the Fourth Amendment, which protects unwarranted search and seizure of property, we think we can all rely on this. We think that this is more than just parchment. But then you change the context and say that we all live on stolen land, and that those gains that we've had through the history of our country, which were, if we follow the 1619 Project, the direct result of establishing a slaveocracy and therefore the fruits of stolen labor. Now we only own stolen property, to which the Fourth Amendment does not apply. So it's changing the context out from underneath the words.
So what's an example of where this has actually led to policy? Where's the policy where the Fourth Amendment no longer applies because of stolen Indian land?
Wow, are you asking that in the wrong context? Because I have actually had the police phone me up and tell me that I wasn't going to be protected because they had been ordered to stand down in the face of a mob that decided it wanted to engage in community policing. So that has already happened to me personally, and
but that's because of shitty policing during this hard. I mean, your situation was horrible, but that's ridiculous.
It's not because of shitty policing. The policing was actually excellent, but the police were not in a position to come in when their civilian leaders ordered them to stand down, which is exactly the same thing that happened in Seattle. It is exactly the same thing that is happening in the streets of Portland. And I must tell you, Jesse, you're creating an awkward situation, because for me, I live with my family in Portland. My mayor has already indicated that he is not interested in the rule of law. My governor has followed suit. And your point is that Biden, because he's not a woke guy, and I agree he's not a woke guy, but your point is we can be sure he will not do the same thing. But my sense is James may have this exactly right, where they have not understood that they don't have the power to control the tiger they've decided to ride.
But this is sort of I don't want to use the word basic. I'm not trying to be condescending. The difference between being the mayor of Portland, where a bunch of sort of radical white assholes will show up and throw bricks through your condo lobby, versus being the president of America, where you're trying to hold together a much more politically diverse coalition. I think what happened to you at Evergreen was horrible. I think CHOP was horrible and was covered grotesquely by my colleagues in the media. I think the Portland stuff was horrible, but you guys are trying to make a much stronger claim, which is that we should infer from these events that we should vote for. You're not saying we should vote for Trump, Bret, but James is that we should vote for someone who's eminently unqualified to be president, who shows no sign of understanding the bare basics of the job, his Office of Science and Technology just put out the claim that they had ended the pandemic. You're saying that things are so bad at Evergreen and in Portland and Seattle that we should let this guy have the keys to the nuclear suitcase, as it were. I think that's
Oh,
where I disagree.
that I am not making that argument at all. I do believe that Trump is not fit for the job, but I would also say the same thing applies to Joe Biden, and that in effect we are being denied the ability to evaluate his suitability for office by, you said the media, James, and I think technically that's right, but it's not just the media, it's also social media, which has decided to modulate our ability to have a discussion over whether or not the corruption of the Democratic nominee is so great that he is, in fact, unfit for the office.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of other aspect of this woke issue that I see, and it doesn't have to be full out woke. It just has to be captured by woke, and it's a distinction that's very important. People who are woke-ish, if you will, people who are sympathetic to the woke argument, tend not to buck it because they know what will happen to them if they do, and it will not be pretty. The Girl Scouts just congratulated Judge Barrett, and within minutes they were descended upon, and they deleted their tweet congratulating her, and now they're being hauled into the court of social media to recant for this in explicitly woke terms. So the media is very unlikely to hold anything in the Democratic Party to account. We see this right now, and they know that if they do, if they go against the party politics that that side wants, that the tiger's going to rip its claws out. This is just exactly what it does every single time. Now, the thing is they've turned already on Biden. Biden is certainly, whether he's woke or woke-ish or whatever, pandering to woke, it doesn't matter. They're already turning on Biden. He came out and he condemned what's going on in Philadelphia in fairly clear terms. And they immediately started talking about how all of the problems with this, about how he doesn't understand systemic racism properly, despite the fact that he said it over and over again. And so they've now turned on him. But this was and always is going to happen. They will, of course, still vote for him, because he's the keys to the castle. And they will then be able to create the kind of agitation that just is exactly like what we saw at Evergreen, which is a kind of agitation that George Bridges didn't have either the spine nor the necessary resources to be able to stand up against effectively. And it takes very, very few people. I hear repeatedly about school systems that are being agitated by a cabal of 10 people, some of whom aren't even in that district. And they just come and they agitate the school board and agitate the school board and agitate the school board. And the next thing you know, anti-racism is their top priority. It takes very, very few people, because nobody's willing to buck against the anti-racist, the whatever else the woke terms happen to be. And we could do a litany of them, I'm sure. I was actually literally also today writing the encyclopedia entry for abolitionism, which is police and prison and basically the entire justice system abolition. And it takes very few people to agitate when essentially nobody will stand up. And again, it doesn't matter if there is a wide base of American citizens who are moderate Democrats who wake up to this problem, if the administrative roles are filled by people who will cave to that pressure, because we will be held to account to that administrative policy, which, by the way, that's been constructed, has the effective force of law.
I'll just repeat this. I mean, I just think what you're failing to realize is that when you're president of the United States and you want to get reelected in 4 years, and you're trying to hold together a very noisy, very diverse Democratic base, you're going to govern as a moderate. And every step of the way, Biden has portrayed himself as a moderate, and that's why he appears to be on the brink of victory. The idea that he's going to win with this argument about just the reasonable guy, go back to normal, and then get into office and let police abolitionists into the Justice Department, is that the concern? I think I don't even understand what.
I think, of course, he will. I think
you think he'll appoint like a department ahead of the DOJ who's pro police abolition?
Not necessarily the head, but within significant roles within the administrative apparatus of the federal government will be given to very woke people. And to be honest with you, as you look at the Department of Justice, I have concerns. If you want to talk about where I have big concerns, they're in the Department of State and the Department of Education. But those are the places where I have the biggest concerns. I have a strong suspicion that our Department of Education under Joe Biden will end up, especially given that he supported the Dear Colleague letter, the Title IX changes in 2000. I think he headed those. if I'm not mistaken. I expect our Department of Education will become every bit as woke as the one we see in Washington right now that's got this whole ethno-mathematics. How do we make 2 + 2 = 5 into a true statement so that I no longer have to have challenges to my ethno-mathematics? Same thing we're seeing in California. We're seeing similar in New York and their departments of education.
You think the DOE will have higher up people working at the top ranks of the DOE to make it so that kids have to say 2 + 2 = 5?
No, but
Jesse,
I think they will absolutely mainline the 1619 project in every school in America. There will be absolutely no defense available through the Department of Education apparatuses for teachers or administrators or parents to push back on any of that. I think that our Department of Education will be effectively a woke organ in a similar sense as what we see in the state of Washington already, which doesn't look overtly scary. It's not like they're doing this, they're just coming out and wearing skirts with Mao's face on them or something. But it's that their policy decisions go one direction and one direction only, and they absolutely pay no attention. They just completely ignore, dismiss, or characterize as racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, blah, 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 blah. The whole, as Judith Butler phrased it, exasperated, etc., of ists and phobias, that anything that disagrees with that position. So they're just going to disregard it out of hand because that is all the woke ideology is capable of doing.
But don't you get that politicians respond to incentives, and that even on the left, the Robin DiAngelo thing, the Ibram X. Kendi thing, this has all generated huge controversy. There's a huge internecine battle going on the left right now over this stuff. Every major liberal outlet has run a piece arguing that Robin DiAngelo's book is crazy. What possible incentive would Biden have to post divisive people to the DOE, especially given that, in the Obama administration, one of the big lefty qualms about the way he handled education was sort of too corporate, too charter schools, stuff like that. I just think there's a huge difference between being the mayor of Oregon, where you really can pander to the 15 radical assholes who show up at city council meetings, and being the president of the United States.
Oh, I don't understand where you get this confidence at all. For one thing, we're seeing this very takeover that James is pointing out in places you would absolutely not expect to see it. If I'm to understand,
well, like where?
Well, apparently it's happening in corporate boardrooms. PayPal made a big announcement today. This is apparently taking place across a wide swath of the elite mainstream. And
federal departments and administrations under the Trump administration, which is openly hostile to it. That's an unexpected place. But if
Reebok puts out a tweet about structural racism, that does not mean Reebok has been infiltrated by wokesters. It means Reebok is pandering.
I don't think you understand how far pandering goes. And the thing is, it's all well and good to say, well, Evergreen was very extreme, and we must avoid that. But what do you think the chances are it's going to happen in the world? But the point is, it is happening in the world for the same reason. It's not that George Bridges is particularly committed to this. He decided to ride the same tiger. And what happened was it came for him. So I think, if I think there's a blind spot that you seem to have, Jesse, it's that you are imagining that because these things are impossible to conceive of, that they won't happen. But we're actually seeing an incredible number of things that are impossible to conceive of happening all the time. And so,
you guys are, this is a moving target thing, because a few minutes ago, you guys said that police abolition is actually happening, that there are cities where police abolition is occurring. And then the example you gave me was fairly weak tea, something in Seattle involving being homeless or poor being a mitigating factor.
No. The example that I would give you is the de facto defunding of the police in major West Coast cities, because people are leaving those jobs and they can't be replaced, and that replacing them is especially hard once you've reduced the funding. So what you have is a job nobody wants now. And that is going to reduce the power of these forces. They're already not responding to 911 calls that would have been standard practice, even months ago. So you're seeing it happen through mechanisms that are perhaps not as official as you would want them to be, but it's occurring.
Another piece, by the way, to that, Bret, that's very important to realize is that when you have, what we do have is a very large exodus of cops old enough to retire, just barely old enough, and they're getting out. Well, suppose that the forces are diminished by whatever percentage, and then the world wakes up tomorrow, and then we end up hiring a bunch of new rookies. What we've lost in that process is also the institutional knowledge. Everybody knows that there's the book about how you're supposed to police, and then there's what you really have to do that's compliant enough with the book, which is a problem in and of itself, which could be a problem with the book or it could be a problem with the institution. But that institutional knowledge, that so-called street knowledge, will be lost permanently as this happens. And we are seeing exoduses from these departments. I remember, it stands out in my memory, a story, and I believe it was in the Portland area where, if I'm not mistaken, it was a black man, but it doesn't particularly matter, where somebody had broken in and they're using a knife and they're whatever, and he calls 911, and it takes the police over 90 minutes to respond because their explanation was, well, we prioritized it as we normally would, just didn't have the resources to send it out, partly because the resources are being drained by having to deal with a literal constant Antifa presence, unless it gets too hot or rains too hard. Apparently they kind of wuss out then. But and that's another aspect too, right? So you're looking at diminished police forces, and those forces are being stuck having to do utter bullshit where they have where they're not even being authorized. There's this whole thing, was it in Oregon also, around in Portland, where they weren't authorized to use things, or Seattle, and the police chief, black woman, steps down because I can't protect the citizens. They're not letting me use my tools. These are the kinds of subversive tactics. See, so for me, what people are failing to understand, because I fully agree, the argument is we can't fight left illiberalism with right illiberalism. We have to fight it with liberalism. But what I'm actually hearing is we have to fight it with left liberalism. I don't actually agree. We have to fight it with unified broad coalition liberalism that sees past these political differences. But the thing is that the liberal order is being assumed by people who vote for Biden that it's just going to hold, that the mechanisms that we have in place, the norms, the traditions, are going to hold. But the entire purpose of the woke movement, in their own words, in their own writing, on almost every document they write, is to subvert that liberal order. And I think it has been so significantly eroded that we have to take a risk with somebody like Trump, who presents clear issues in terms of his potential fitness for office, in terms of his I'm most concerned, honestly, of all the things, about his rather tenuous commitment to the truth, alternative facts, and so on. This is alarming to me, much more so than much of anything else from him, because everything follows from that as well. But we do see in this a willingness to stand and say, no, we're not going to, if you read the executive order against critical race theory, for example, we're not going to stereotype or scapegoat based on race and sex. That shouldn't be a controversial American opinion, but in California, we see, I know it's underwater, which is great. We see an extraordinarily well-funded, 10 times its opposition, campaign to remove the anti-discrimination language from the California state constitution, in exact lockstep with the proposition by Ibram Kendi, who was a fool, who said that if discrimination creates more equitable outcomes, it is anti-racist. But if anti-discrimination creates less equitable outcomes, then that's racist. So anti-discrimination is racist is a proposition of Ibram Kendi that's attempting to rewrite the California Constitution for real right now.
I think what makes it, again, I'm not trying to sound like a dick, but what makes it hard for me to take this that seriously is you're talking about, you're worried about people violating liberal norms. We are 6 days from an election where the sitting president has given every indication that he won't respect the result if he doesn't like it, where various Republican attorneys general have made it clear they're going to do everything they can to throw out potentially hundreds of thousands of ballots. This idea that I should be more worried about people who have no institutional power at this point versus people who have a huge deal of institutional power and are just broadcasting that they don't respect the democratic process. I think maybe what it comes down to with me and both of you at times is like general agreement that these ideas are bad and stupid. But my main accusation is just a lack of understanding sort of proportionality and what we should be scared about when. I have no concerns that Tuesday, the wrong person will be declared the winner, or in the weeks that follow, because of like wokeness or dumb campus radicals. I have a lot of concern that Donald Trump will simply fail to leave office because he has said he might do that, or that lawsuits will fight. Like, I feel like you just ignore the entire other side of the liberalism equation, which is often generated by people who already have institutional power.
Well,
Can
wait
I
a
ask
second.
you what you think that CNN is going to say the day after the election?
Um,
Let's say that Donald Trump squeaks out a narrow victory. And we'll, for the purposes of the argument, we'll assume it's veridical, that he has squeaked out a narrow victory by a few electoral college points. And in fact, let's just throw a little extra to meat on the pie and say that, in fact, he lost the popular vote. What's CNN going to say? So you've said what Donald Trump will say if he perhaps, as we reverse the circumstances, Donald Trump's going to contest it, lawyers, blah, blah, blah. What's CNN going to say? What's the New York Times going to say? The media has tremendous power as well.
I don't think Wolf Blitzer and Anderson Cooper are going to be up there making false claims about the Democrats having won. Nate Silver just said on his
specifically with a building on fire and the graphic behind saying with Chris Cuomo saying, where does it say that protests have to be peaceful, which is literally in the First Amendment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been critical of media too. I think in terms
of course you'll recognize I've been perfectly for 5 years insanely critical, and I mean insanely critical of Donald Trump. And
I don't think they are. I don't.
No, I think podcast out. You talked about the one about my vote for Trump. I put a podcast out a few months ago saying he's the first postmodern president. We live in an age of narratives, and that everything's basically screwed because we have no capacity. We have post-truth on Trump's side, and we have postmodernism on the woke side, and we're in this warring age of bullshit, and everything's lost. And I said Trump's the first postmodern president. And I went vigorously about his breaking of norms of decency and decorum. I went vigorously against his flirting with authoritarian rhetoric. I went vigorously against his, again, the thing that worries me about him is the alternative facts thing. His policy has been fairly milquetoast for the most part. It's been actually closer to a conservative-ish Democrat than it is to anything Republican, which has made them quite mad over the past 4 years.
How so? I mean, like the tax bill was just classic red meat GOP fare. Has he passed a lot of Democratic? I think he's been.
How's the peace in the Middle East doing for you?
And what do you mean?
I mean, there's more peace in the Middle East. There's fewer wars. This is just his foreign policy has actually been commendable.
You think Trump's foreign policy has led to relative peace in the Middle East?
Well, he certainly hasn't started a new significant conflict.
Right. Now, I will admit that it's been, like playing chicken. I thought for sure that North Korea was going to nuke us for a little while there. That turned out not to happen. I don't know what I think of him.
Which doesn't mean he didn't run an unacceptable risk.
Right.
Right. It worked out, but it may be that he, gambled everything and it worked out.
You thought North Korea was going to do a suicidal nuclear strike on us?
I thought it was totally possible. Yeah.
So wait, before we let Jesse off the hot seat here, totally. I want to.
No, I don't mind.
I want to.
I put myself there.
Well, we're all going to end up there. I mean, you're just first. That's it. But I want to put 2 points on the table and see if we can't make some progress here. One is there seems a clear pattern where at the moment, cities in states where the city and the state are both democratically governed are illustrating a pattern that runs counter to your central premise, which is that basically people aren't going to go that radical because it's not that popular and that things will stay stable. And my concern is if all it takes for Portland to go crazy is keeping the feds out, right? If the combination of the mayor and the governor both being Democrats is enough to drive the city insane, and it is, I mean, it's not, we are frequently falsely portrayed as saying that Portland is on fire, which it isn't, but there is nightly rioting and it is violent, and the rule of law is being sidelined to allow that continue for no rational reason. So why should I imagine that if we elect a mainstream DNC Democrat to the highest office in the land, that he's going to behave in a fundamentally different way than the Democrats at the state and local level?
You're saying that because I want to make sure I understand that because there was rioting in Portland that you attribute to Democratic leadership, a Democratic president will lead to unrest nationally?
No, I'm saying that in major cities all up and down the West Coast, where you have Democratic local rule and you have Democratic governors, you're having a failure of governance and a flirtation with the suspension of the rule of law. And that the concern is that this actually speaks to the internal dynamics of the Democratic Party at this moment. Now, mind you, I'm speaking of a party that I've belonged to for my entire life. I don't like saying this, but my sense is the Democratic Party has completely lost the capacity to govern because it has been toying with this woke ideology, which is frankly manifestly insane.
But you're taking the specific, admittedly very bad incidents from the summer, and you're attributing them to the quote Democratic Party, ignoring the fact that the Democratic Party consists of a huge coalition that is mostly moderate people, and that all the states Biden needs to win to come out on top Tuesday are states where he has to win moderate voters. It's just that's the what I view as, despite the fact that you're a much smarter person than me, a little bit of sloppiness. You say that is the Democrats. It's not the Democrats. It's these two very crazy cities where radicals gained an unfortunate foothold over the summer. There's nothing about Biden's history as a lawmaker that suggests real radicalism. There's nothing about the coalition the Democrats have put together that suggests it's a radical coalition. The moderates are always going to have more power, and that's why Democratic presidents, including the most recent one, Obama, tend to lead in a very moderate way. I can't imagine any situation where Biden isn't a moderate leader. I can't.
That's the assumption that I question, is that the moderates will hold, and I also question the claim that there's been no establishment Democratic radicalism. I mean, you can read Biden's racial equity program, Biden-Harris's racial equity program on their website. It is not quite the full litany of demands that you would expect out of Black Lives Matter, but it is quite close to that for a moderate representation of it. And then you did have Kamala Harris explicitly on Twitter urging people to give money to the bailout fund for the rioters in Minneapolis to bail them out of jail. So there are certainly concerning issues around exactly the issue that Bret is raising within the established Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden's running mate, who we must assume, A, will have lots of power, and B, very well may have all the power, as Joe Biden does not seem to be in the greatest of fitness. And it does appear that these stories that are breaking now may question his fitness for office. And then we already know that the woke agitators are angry at him and are going to turn on him as soon as they can. It's actually entirely possible, given the way that this all operates, that Biden will be elected and Kamala will be named president in January, because they will spend the next 2 to 3 months deposing him. And that's also doesn't talk
who's
about
going to depose Joe Biden?
Anybody who decides that compromat that has come to light, possibly, and been suppressed for the last 2 weeks, is now worth paying attention to once his ticket has won the presidency.
What compromat do you think exists that is so threatening to Biden that an unprecedented thing of him being deposed?
Ties to China.
Yep.
What ties to China?
Familial. Financial.
Sorry, okay, I didn't mean to get us off track.
No. You're right on track. This is exactly where I was going to take you next.
Well, can I ask one thing about something he just said? Because I want to be concrete about policy. And I'm curious, what is the aspect of the Biden-Harris racial equity plan that most concerns James? Because that could get a little more concrete and policy-oriented.
The word equity, period, frankly, because I know what equity means. It means forcing equality of outcomes.
Is that what they say? Is that what they say in the plan?
Of course not. They never say what equity means. I even had a local politician, now granted that's as far away as you can possibly get for city council, as far away as you can possibly get from the presidency in terms of politics and political power, contact me repeatedly. So every time this woman contacted me and said, here's some issue, garbage trucks or something that I'm campaigning about, I replied, I have one question for you. Do you support equality or equity, and do you know the difference? And this led to, I ended up being invited to talk to her on the phone. I haven't done so yet. She doesn't actually know the difference, but the word is being used. I will tell you that the activists know the difference. They certainly know the difference, and they will hold the elected politician to the real meaning of the word once they are stuck with it. But the plan explicitly hits it hits all of the regular notes. And of course, it's very long. You can read, and it's many, many pages, but it talks about, explicitly giving large amounts of money to invest in Black-owned business, et cetera. It explicitly talks about trying to overcome systemic racism, which doesn't exist. It is not a thing. It is a invented concept that has no clear or stable definition, and is not fixable. And so it is going to be subject to the entire woke ideology. Equity comes from the idea of social equity theory. It's not like it came up in some, banker's back room or something. It is this idea that we have to redistribute the outcomes of society, the resources of society, in accordance with creating equal outcomes. And it's all written in there that they're going to start taking concrete steps. The thing is, the woke ideology cannot compromise. You have to understand, it is not capable of compromising. It is against their religion to compromise, because every inch, so I said it this way to somebody the other day on the phone, say that you give 60% to the woke ideology and you say 40% we're keeping to ourselves in a compromise, so you got 60, we keep 40. What they would say is that they are now complicit with that 40% of the status quo that's being maintained, which means it's absolutely intolerable. They violated their religion to compromise. So what they do, of course, is take as much as they can, wait till everybody blows up and calms down, then they back off, and then they do it again. And then they do it again until finally you have, hey, hey, ho, ho, Bret Weinstein's got to go. And it'll be Joe Biden has got to go.
I'm reading the actual policy, and this is just sort of like neoliberal, moderate red meat. So specifically, Biden will spur public-private investment through a new small business opportunity plan. That's like 90s Clinton DLC stuff. There's nothing radical about this at all.
But you're misunderstanding the way this actually works, Jesse, which is that the thing is designed for you to see what you need to see. And the fact is, it is very radical on the front edge. And the thing that I think both James and I are concerned about here is that the front edge dictates where this actually goes, not what the DNC thinks it wants. And we're getting all kinds of indications from the Biden-Harris campaign that they at least want the woke revolutionaries to believe that they are in fact on their side. The statement, for example, about the shooting in Philadelphia strongly suggests a kind of sympathy for someone attacking police with a weapon that is absolutely...
You mean when Biden immediately came out against the rioting?
No, he immediately came out with a statement saying that he sympathizes with the victim and that's a black life that matters.
Wasn't it a mentally ill guy with a knife who was killed by police?
Yes, and his statement was very, very clear that he said that, it's a tragedy when a life is lost because of mental illness, which is playing straight into the woke narrative that this is mental illness, therefore we need de-escalation, therefore we needed a totally different, reimagined police force that is not going to use guns.
Biden didn't say you need a reimagined police force. He expressed sympathy for a mentally ill guy with a knife who was killed.
You are going to be very happy to find that there is support for a very moderate interpretation of everything that's going to come out of the Biden-Harris campaign. It doesn't mean that that's the way policy is going to go. And I think I heard James say very directly that it wasn't an issue of the campaign being sympathetic. Frankly, I would argue that they're completely cynical. But they are not going to be in a position to control what outcomes come on the far side of this, because this ideology has discovered it has a tremendous amount of power that it gets through stigma primarily, not because it's popular, but because people are afraid.
But I've already do you guys have a response to my claim that the actual Democratic base, Biden's core constituency, doesn't like wokeness and isn't woke, and therefore that stuff just like
Do you have, Jesse, any concept of the number of not CEOs, people below CEO, but usually in the C-suite to corporations have spoken to me in the past 4 months and told me that they are held hostage despite knowing that they don't want this in their organization. And some are CEOs, some are the head of the organization, that they're held hostage to this because they have to do something. They're held hostage to the ideology. So they're putting out these woke statements, but they're forcing this training that's now, at least in the federal government and federal contractors, been named properly as absolutely inappropriate, but they're held hostage. So you have companies that are overwhelmingly majority moderate, sensible, business-minded people who just want to turn a profit, who just want to go to work every day, and they're held hostage to what might be a very small number of individuals, usually within a moderate-sized company. You only need 3 or 4 within the HR level, middle management structure, plus a amount of pressure from the outside that can be manufactured by tens of people on the internet to crack an organization. And this is happening over and over and over again. Again, I think that the moderate Democratic base, based on the literally thousands of emails I get from them every month, is utterly terrified and utterly at a loss for what they can possibly do. So my question to you is, how does that voice speak to Joe Biden and tell him not to rearrange the administrative state to put in the people that the woke are demanding? I don't know if you knew there was an occupation outside the Department of Education this week in preparation for the election, that they're already trying to force the incoming Department of Education or the existing Department of Education to meet all of these demands. And they set up a tent city. I was told yesterday that it was removed, but nobody knew what to do. And even the conservatives, who are extremely pro-Trump, were sitting on their hands. The exact quote that I had from somebody is that everybody on the Republican side of this is either clueless or feckless. So if the Republicans are mostly afraid to fight it, what makes you think that there's going to be a moderate Democrat response, or that moderate Democrats on the ground are going to be listened to at all?
Because no one has been scared to be pro-Biden. Like this whole last awful year on the Democratic side has been the people you're worried about losing in every possible way, and losing overwhelmingly. I feel like this is almost a religious mindset where whatever evidence I present, you will present as proving your case. So obviously, if Warren or Sanders had won, or maybe Warren in particular, that would have been proof to you the woke are winning. The opposite of that happened. The least woke candidate won. Biden won. That's still somehow proof that I have to fear wokeness in the federal government. I'm just not sure what would convince you otherwise. And I got to say, I'm a little bit biased.
So wait a second. We're gonna. Unfortunately, we have to move on because I don't want to leave Jesse as the only person whose feet get held to the fire.
Yeah,
okay.
Set me on fire.
Right. You're next, bud.
I really don't think there's much to burn you about, to be honest, Bret. I think your vote is kind of principled. So maybe you get out of the fire, but I have to get burned. I voted for Trump, and I'll even say it here, and I'll make everybody in the world shake. Make America great again. We need to.
Wait, make America great again? You're not signing up for that last A in MAGA, are you?
I mean, yes and no, but it's the freaking slogan, so we're just going to go with what the slogan is.
No. That slogan is a deliberate finger in the eye, right? It is a classic dog whistle where for certain people who have been through a heyday, we could return potentially. All right, go ahead.
I believe you. But what if I said make our colleges of education great again? Am I sticking a finger in the eye and a dog whistle or am I saying, holy crap, it's been corrupted by critical pedagogists who have a willful bent to turn our higher education system into a critical theory morass, and they have been very successful at that, and we need to make our education great again?
I get the defense, but frankly, it's a little too ornate. I think the problem with MAGA is that there are many people, and I would include myself in this, for whom America has been great. And then there are other populations for which it never got there, right? Now, personally, as a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, I would argue that the most important thing to do is to make America great in the sense of it being great for every population. That includes blacks and Indians.
I fully agree with that, Bret. I fully agree with that.
I believe you do. But I think the point is when you make a slogan like Make America Great Again, the problem is it inherently divides us over the question of whether it was ever great. Now, I would argue it's a marvelous prototype and that we have made massive progress in the right direction, and that the only sane thing to do is to continue that progress as quickly as possible, right?
I fully agree.
So in any case, let's leave the slogan aside. Okay, we have a person who you have, to your credit, pointed out has a very loose and facultative relationship to reality, who is empowered with nuclear codes, among other things, that his handling of the COVID crisis, which I would admit is complex, was absolutely preposterous and resulted not only in a large number of deaths, but also in the isolation of the nation. That is to say, our ability to travel to other places and therefore our ability to fully participate in the world is dependent on us getting control of this virus. And effectively what we did was surrender. And why did we surrender? Because the president decided to politicize the issue rather than confront it. Now, I can see nothing more anti-patriotic than politicizing an issue that should have no political polls. That is to say, a pandemic that we all face together. And to do so at the expense of our ability to participate in the world is just cutting off our nose to spite our face. So this is not somebody who can be trusted with governance, right? There are issues on which he'll do well, and there are issues on which he'll do appallingly. And by and large, all I can see as a generating function is that he plays politics with everything, and the results are arbitrary at best.
I don't know that they're fully arbitrary, but I tend to agree, especially with your analysis of the COVID situation. I was, in fact, I think it was in, I'm going to guess April, but I don't remember which month, but I had tweeted quite wrongly, or I think, that at that moment Trump was done because he had done such a horrendous job with the initial parts of the response to COVID that even the Republicans who had supported him, even actually, I should say, Team MAGA that had supported him, saw him as weak, saw him as ineffectual, saw him as having done the wrong thing for America at that time. And so I fully agree with your assessment because of his various attributes, whether that's a tenuous relationship to the truth or really a relationship to the truth that is set up to suit him in whatever moment he happens to be in. A very opportunistic relationship to the truth, I suppose, is a good way to put that. And or whether that be his flair, if you will, for politicizing everything and driving the media insane, which partly I actually think is is now a net credit to his role in office. I thought that was not the case before, but I think that is the case, that it's a net credit now because I'm so distrustful of so much of the media. And I'm not saying, oh God, Fox News is great. It's nothing like that. I don't trust them either. My distrust for them goes back to before Jon Stewart ever called them Bullshit Mountain. But now that I see that I don't know if it was always the case. I don't know how long it's been the case. I have no way to judge that. But what's going on the CNN, MSNBC, and these mainstream channels, New York Times, it's just unconscionable. So there are many things. I totally agree. In fact, this is the hardest part for my defending my vote for Trump is that as I've said, if this were a normal time, if these were normal circumstances, not only would I have voted for Biden, but I would have done as I did in 2016 and as I did in 2018, and I would have said, we have to vote blue top to bottom without thinking. I would have enthusiastically voted Democrat from top to bottom without thinking, which is the literal exact opposite of what I did in the election when I went to the poll yesterday. I voted top to bottom Republican. And I've never voted for a Republican in my life. It's that the circumstances have changed. So I manifestly agree with essentially every negative argument that you can launch against Trump, unless it's one that's couched a little bit too deeply in an unfair characterization of him that's been peddled to us by a dishonest media for 4 or 5 years now, depending on when you start counting. And so I feel like my eyes are open, that I know what I'm buying, but that the garbage I'm buying is priced in. And it's, as you phrased it earlier, a calculated risk that may not, I don't guarantee. Like somebody recently asked me, what percent chance do you think that there would be that you have the wrong vote if you made the wrong decision? And I think I thought about it for a few hours, and I decided 30%. 30% chance I've made the wrong decision. I'm not a 100%, have a MAGA day, put on the hat, and everything kind of character here. I am very concerned about Trump being in office for all of the reasons that we've discussed, all of the reasons that people have discussed for 4 years. Tremendous blunders, tremendously unconscionable things that have been either proposed or attempted, or in some cases put into action. And yet I think it is a necessary, the stance on critical race theory and the willingness to take that ideology on and to stand in its way is enough to take an imperfect defender in the absence of a perfect defender.
Interesting. Well, I must say I applaud your forthrightness in estimating the likelihood that you've got it wrong. All right, this is a standard I try to hold myself to also in all kinds of things. Anytime that one has to make an assessment of what's true, it's very powerful to have to assess the likelihood that you've erred. I would certainly be curious. I think in my case, my vote doesn't lend itself to that kind of analysis, but I could certainly do it with the other two candidates. Jesse, do you want to either take advantage of the fact that James' jugular is showing, or to estimate your own likelihood of having erred in this? Or what do you think? What do you hear?
I guess what struck me is like sort of the stuff James focuses on versus what he ignores, and what he sees as disqualifying versus not disqualifying. So, the word equity appeared on the racial justice plan on the Biden-Harris website. I still haven't heard exactly what aspect of the policy, other than the existence of that word, is so off-putting. But then things like proposing a ban of all Muslims, even though he couldn't get away with that, that's not disqualifying. Having your Office of Science and Technology put out a statement saying that you ended a pandemic that will soon have killed 300,000 Americans, that's not disqualifying. I just think, especially if you're in Tennessee and your vote doesn't matter anyway, you had every reason in the world to just, if you're that off put by Biden, just sit it out.
That was my plan until about a week ago, when the Democrats started very openly talking about abolishing the Constitution.
No, the Democrats didn't. There was a New Republic article that did.
Well, actually, several people have done that. There was a single major article, but I am definitely too online, and this is not a fringe opinion among the online chattering crowd, including those with blue checks, such as.
Can we put a little money on the possibility that Biden or Harris will make any proposal along the lines of defunding or abolishing the police in the next 2 years?
Oh, there's a big difference between them proposing it and this happening on their watch, which is, I think, what both James and I are concerned about.
Well, but that goes back to the sort of non-falsifiability thing. Like, what would convince you guys you're wrong? Like, so for example, if Biden or Harris did say that, or if Biden signed a bill, that really cut the police force in a way that, for example, most Black Americans are opposed to, because Black Americans tend to be opposed to that. That would convince me I'm wrong. But
well, wait a second. You've asked what would tell me I'm wrong. I'm happy to tell you.
Sure,
okay?
Me too.
Let's say, and we're likely to get a test of this, if Biden is elected, if either Biden or Harris were to force the hand of Western mayors and governors to restore the rule of law or send in federal officers to do it for them, that would tell me that I'm wrong. So I'm interested in being wrong, and we may find out if I am. But the concern is that effectively staying out of the fray will hand over these locales to this woke ideology, and not because anybody has officially agreed to do it.
See, yeah, basically, Biden and Harris could just come out and make similar statements. They could come out and say, you know what, President Trump's executive order against critical race theory is divisive. It is actually causing racial scapegoating and racial stereotyping, and it is teaching divisive tenets as though they are fact. And we're going to uphold that particular executive order and push to get it made legislative. They could say that they are absolutely, unequivocally going to take anything like defunding the police off of the table, and they could start making statements consistent with this rather than kind of pandering to the Black Lives Matter movement around a particular cop getting chased with a knife and eventually, after nearly a minute, deciding to shoot the person. They could easily stand up and say this is not just the riots that came up and the looting that came up after the fact. They could say, we stand with our police officers in this country to defend and protect citizens. We see this particular outcome as a tragedy, and we're not going to step away from our police. We're not going to step away from the protection of our citizens.
That's what Biden did. He said it was a tragedy the mentally ill guy was killed, but that he was completely opposed to riots. That's exactly what you wanted him to say.
No, that's not what I read in the statement at all. I think the problem is, what I read in the statement is support for an ideology that reflexively, on the basis of skin color, sympathizes in an interaction between police and citizens. And the fact is, when citizens attack police officers with weapons, I at least want to hear sympathy for them, even if the person is mentally ill and we can't hold them responsible for what they're doing. I want sympathy for police officers who are in a position where they have to defend their own safety.
So the argument is that Biden, one of the lead figures in the 94 crime bill, and Harris, who is hated by the left because of her time as a prosecutor in California, they're not sufficiently pro-cop?
Oh, Jesse. Again, the concern is not that their sympathies lie with the Black Lives Matter movement. The concern is over their cynicism and the power that hands to the Black Lives Matter movement. And to the extent that we've spent all of our time talking about domestic affairs, I don't know how much you know about what is revealed by Hunter Biden's apparent laptop, but the jaw-dropping implication of not just metaphorical influence peddling, but absolutely literal influence peddling involving not just the Biden family, but involving Joe Biden himself, that this suggests basically an amoral entity, which the Democratic Party has placed in a position to take the highest office in the land, and the danger of an amoral person in 2021 inhabiting the office of president in the disguise of a liberal is that they will play the game in a way that is empowering of this movement and endangering to those of us who subscribe to basic American principles like the rule of law, like the
Are you talking about amoral influence peddling with foreign governments? Are you talking about Trump or Biden?
Both of them. This is why I did what I did. I believe that this is absolutely unacceptable, that the duopoly would hand us this choice. And the fact is, the Democratic Party did have alternatives. The Democratic Party rallied around Joe Biden because it wasn't ready to surrender its influence peddling racket in order to defeat Trump. And what it did instead was it preserved its influence peddling racket and put us at risk of reelecting Trump by nominating somebody who's completely uninspiring to, as far as I can tell, every single member of the party.
What's the strongest public claim you'd be willing to make about what Joe Biden did with regard to China? What do you think has been proven at this point?
Well, I wouldn't say anything has been proven because we actually have an American mechanism for proving things. But I would say what is implied by what we can see in the Hunter Biden material is that Joe Biden allowed his family to enrich itself by peddling access to him. Now, what implication this has for the American posture towards, for example, China, we don't know. But the potential implications of a morally compromised position with respect to China on the basis of business relationships that have impact on that policy, the implications of that are absolutely staggering. And the fact is, I would at least want to hear you concerned that although it may be that this seems like a compromising relationship, that there might be less to it than we think at this early stage in our understanding of what took place, that the very fact that the media would hide it from us and not allow us to judge for ourselves, the very fact that social media would place us in a position where discussing it becomes a hazard to our ability to stay within these channels, suggests we are in a very dangerous scenario that is actually reminiscent of some of the worst regimes in modern history.
That's
Worst
right.
regimes in modern history because Twitter
Absolutely.
banned people.
No,
Because
no.
Twitter,
Because our ability to talk to each other is now happening under watchful eyes that want us to conclude certain things, right? Now, this isn't like any of these past regimes. There's something very novel about where we are, but there's also something reminiscent of the Stasi and the Bolsheviks. And the fact is, we at least all ought to be concerned about it. And if it turns out that those of us who are most concerned are perhaps seeing more than is there, then fine, we can apologize for that later. But if it happens that those of you who aren't that concerned are actually underrating the danger, and that this is in fact going to take over our ability to have normal discussions that are in theory protected by our founding documents, then that's a very serious matter.
well,
I
I mean,
agree.
the social media's reaction to this was ridiculous. That's why Katie Herzog and I devoted one of our episodes to it. It was completely ridiculous. The Biden thing, I don't think anything has been proven about Joe Biden himself. I think even in a hypothetical situation where someone proved that Biden directly altered policy to enrich his family, which I don't think there's any evidence for, even then, what we know Trump has done on that front is 10 times worse. We know what Trump does. We know that he's
I don't know about
400
worse.
Yeah,
I know
don't
about
either.
bad.
Oh my guys,
Trump is
just
terrible
in
at
terms
hiding
of the
things.
strength of evidence between Biden's corruption. This is sort of like in 2016 when people tried to pretend the questions about Hillary were equivalent to the questions about Trump, and I just completely disagree with that.
What I
Trump's
see though is Trump being very bad or disinterested in hiding his emoluments, and Biden being very good at putting them in his children. That's what I see. And so I don't know which is worse. I actually don't know which is worse.
But we don't even know what's the accusation against Joe Biden versus. My understanding, Hunter Biden seems like a scumbag who was trying to, trade off his father. I've seen no evidence that Joe Biden himself did anything, and a lot of this centers on a
What did
policy.
Joe Biden know, and when did he know it? That's the question.
What are you suggesting he knew?
Well,
what do you suggest?
there's a question about whether or not you think that Hunter Biden was pretending to provide access to Joe Biden, and there was no actual access, that the what seems like it is likely to be a large number of millions of dollars that changed hands and went to people who didn't have any skills that would explain why they were earning it, that was being paid and it was a con because, in fact, Joe Biden was remaining insulated, or were the people who were paying for access to Joe Biden actually getting it, and did it have effects on policy that we're going to have a very hard time figuring out, but certainly couldn't have been public-minded, or they wouldn't have had to be paid for?
You're asking if the kid who made a video of himself falling asleep with a crack pipe in his mouth may have lied about his ability to connect people with his father?
I'm not asserting one way or the other. My concern is that you aren't worried.
That's right.
In the grand scheme of things to be worried about, no. Hunter Biden versus Donald Trump, it's like worrying about a mosquito bite versus Ebola. It really is. And I don't think these are.
I will say, when I started the Unity movement, I was very clear about the fact that the problem that we face is one of rampant influence peddling. Okay, now you can take that as a prediction. And then the fact that apparent influence peddling has come spilling out of Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop is pretty interesting, right? Either that was an amazing coincidence, or those of us who have been tracking the DNC and understand what their real business model is can see this, and now you're finally getting a glimpse of it.
I don't want to do the whataboutism thing, but we have in Trump, we have someone where it's all like right there in the open and we can see it, and you don't need any conspiracy theorizing or to connect any dots that might not be there. And on top of that, there's very significant policy differences between the two that to me would prevail, even if I thought Joe Biden was much more corrupt than I think he is. I just think, given the evidence at hand, equating the two in terms of influence peddling or corruption, I find to be crazy, frankly. Trump has completely rewritten the rule book of what sort of behavior is and isn't allowed. From the hotels all the way down. So it's
he has, and unacceptably so.
Yeah.
No
so
question
you have
about
that,
it.
and then you have this it's like you have this big freshly baked cake, Trump, and then you have like this little bite of like stale cupcake, supermarket cupcake for Biden that I don't think will go anywhere.
This with polonium in it.
Yeah, this is not a small matter, because for one thing,
it might be a small matter.
No, it can't be, because if you can infer, and I think we can from what we have seen already, and the fact that there is no denial about its authenticity, if it is true that foreign governments, hostile governments, are paying for access to Joe Biden that they didn't get, that's also very bad for us. So the question is, did he really not know, and therefore was access really not delivered? In which case, how were we harmed by these entities being told that they would be given access and charged for it, and then it not being delivered? This is a major problem. And the fact is, if Joe Biden is the nominee, which he obviously is, then he has an obligation to say something took place in my family. It was obviously unacceptable. I didn't know about it. Here is how that worked. And here's what I believe the consequences were. And we're not getting anything like that. What we're getting is interference in our ability to discuss it.
Well, okay, you're getting interference because Twitter and Facebook overreacted because they're horrible companies run by morons. I grant that. I think Biden...
They're not horrible companies run by morons. They're partisans.
Right, they're not run by morons for certain. Definitely not morons.
It's complicated. I think they're very opportunistic, and they don't have... Anyway, the point is...
they're partisans. You know, they tossed Unity 2020 off of Twitter. We still haven't had our account restored. All we do is oppose both of these parties, right? They're against that, apparently. So that's a serious matter as far as I'm concerned.
But that doesn't make sense as a reason you were tossed, frankly, because every Chapo Trap House and Red Scare listener is constantly tweeting about how they hate both parties and don't want to vote for either, and they should vote for third parties. Wouldn't there be a purge of third party people?
Because the third parties aren't a threat. The reason the third parties aren't a threat is because they are ideological. What was threatening was a bunch of people across ideologies gathering together and saying that the real problem is corruption. And
that's right.
So that was what was threatening. And it's not that we were so, large and had such great reach, but the point was that message was so resonant that they had to nip it in the bud, and that's what they did.
So you think you were shut down because you were standing up against corruption, basically?
I know they lied to us. I know they told us that we had registered many accounts in order to advance a hashtag, and that our own internal investigation showed nothing of the kind. And I know that they went silent when we pointed that out. So yes, this is the only conclusion one can draw. And then the fact that Facebook tossed me off after I, basically had an extended period of inactivity, telling me I had triggered some algorithm, suggests that yes, something is going on behind the scenes that involves certain people who are inconsistent with the narrative that they want to advance are being removed so that they don't have impact on the conversation.
But didn't the woman from Facebook subsequently tell you it was because they wrongly thought you were a fake account?
You mean the reply to my tweet with 50,000 likes to it, the one sentence reply that said I had triggered some sort of a mechanism after they had already told me that that they had reviewed my elimination from Facebook and that it was irreversible? There's nothing consistent about that story. Something is off. At the very least, we should all be able to agree to that.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the idea that your organization was banned because you posed such a threat to the political order, I don't believe that's conspiracy theory.
Okay, can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
You have a Twitter account.
Yep.
Could you DM me a link to the website articlesofunity.org.
Sure. I'll do that right now.
And then tell me what you see on your side.
Articlesofunity.org. Hold on.
Yep.
Bret Weinstein, you tweeted me earlier. All right. I am sending it to you. Let's see here. I'm worried this doesn't make for a good live stream. You sent a link. Okay. It's sent. A plan to save our republic.
Okay. Now, I'm taking a risk here because maybe they've fixed it. But let me see.
Seems like it went through.
Seems like it went through.
Okay.
Cool. Let's see.
What did you think was going to happen?
Check it out. It didn't work, Jesse. You think it worked because you're the sender.
Yeah.
But you were trying to pass something on that you'd already seen, right? On my side, what I get is this. Oops.
I can't see it.
Too high. Lower. It's a bit fuzzy.
It says, message hidden due to suspicious content. Okay?
No, that's not good.
This is, I don't know how long after. It was the last night of the Republican convention when Twitter suspended our account. So this is months later.
Mm-hmm.
They are still blocking your ability to send a link to our website, which does nothing other than portray the major parties as complicit in the corruption of our governmental structure, right? There's no excuse for this, right? Now, originally, Twitter had a algorithm that prevented you from tweeting a link to that website. They fixed that. So they're obviously aware of the problem. This is actually new, that they are blocking your ability to DM a link to our website. Now, what the hell?
Well, you click view and then it works, right? Can you click view? I agree that it's not good.
You're making excuses, Jesse. At the very least, we can agree that this is preposterous, right? You've got a grassroots movement of people opposed to the duopoly, and you can't DM a link to our website? I challenge you to find anything on the website that should be triggering Twitter to restrict anything. It's nonsense.
No, I agree with that. I guess my experiences with Twitter have been that there's such incompetence in terms of what does and doesn't get banned, including like I'll report an explicit death threat or explicit anti-Semitism and be told that doesn't violate the standard. So I wouldn't infer from that Twitter is pro-anti-Semitism. I just think incompetence is a more likely explanation.
Do you know who told us
this was marked as dangerous content a bunch of times too? It wouldn't show the image. It said that it had to be unhidden, the image of I think it's the rainbow or the word race. I don't know.
Was it the presence of Helen Pluckrose on the cover?
It could be Helen Pluckrose.
Could be Helen
She's
Pluckrose.
a very controversial character.
She's very dangerous.
I will totally grant that it's ridiculous that is marked as suspicious content. I think where I disagree is, again, like I'm saying, I put that in the context of all the other insane decisions Twitter makes about, moderation.
Well, we're going to have to put this on pause, but let's just say there's something very off about our social media environment, our media environment, and the major parties. And the fact that it has put us in a predicament where reasonable people, as I believe all three of us are, cannot see eye to eye on what a reasonable vote might look like is pretty shocking.
Do you mind, Bret? I know we're gone way over the plan time. Do you mind if I look a little deeper into the equity plan since it came up and Jesse read the first bullet point? I won't go into the weeds, but we do have
There's
achieve
nothing.
Equity in management training and higher education opportunities connected to the jobs for the future. That's quotas, racial quotas.
Opportunity. That's equity of opportunity, not outcome.
Equity by definition is adjusting shares so that citizens A and B are made equal.
No, equity by hold on. Should we pull up the actual definition of equity? Equality of being fair and impartial. Equity and opportunity.
No.
I don't think you understand how.
No, I do. You're saying that people.
Social equity theory is the definition of equity.
James, there is a normal dictionary definition of equity too. If I term equity, it doesn't mean I mean it in that regard. And in that context, they're saying
subversive. Who would possibly use double meanings of terms to advance a political agenda while getting the liberal apparatus?
But this is what I mean. It's like a lack. It's just sort of, again, not
your dictionary definition is the Mott.
That's right.
No. This is not a Mott and Bailey thing.
Oh, yes, it is. I've lived it. I've lived it up close with faculty colleagues. It is absolutely a Motte and Bailey.
If you guys look back
Biden.
at Democratic speeches from 1988 and 1990 and 1992, they will use the word equity. It is a commonly used word.
It was a commonly used word.
Ensure equity in Biden's bold infrastructure and clean energy investments. Racial quotas.
He's not
Strengthen the
called for
Federal
racial.
Reserve's focus on economic gaps. Wealth redistribution. Promote diversity and accountability and leadership across key positions in all federal agencies. There's my administrative state claim. Diversity means hiring people who have the right beliefs about diversity. Accountability means firing people who don't.
All right.
Address longstanding inequities in agriculture.
Here is my suggestion. So I think we have reached
combat.
What did you say?
I said physical combat as a joke, but James would kick my ass because he actually works out.
This is true.
One-on-one basketball.
Debate to the death. All right. I think we've each made our points. I think the meta point is most important. I'm certainly hoping, I think it's unlikely, but I am hoping that Tulsi Gabbard wins this election, and that we are freed from discovering which is the worst fate among the two that you guys have voted for. What we had planned was to have you guys answer a couple of questions from our audience using the Democracy AI platform. We have gone over our expected time on this initial phase, but let's just see if we can get that in there. Elizabeth, are you able to join us?
Yes. Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Can we get a question for James and Jesse? Actually, I shouldn't say. I should just say Jesse James because it's so much cooler.
We're cool when we're together, Jesse. By ourselves, we're nothing.
Exactly. The Transformer situation.
Captain Planet.
There we go. That's better.
You have to be the heart guy, though, because that's not a real element.
Fair enough.
All right, so I'll just take this opportunity to point out that I am not, in fact, drinking some fruity girly drink. What I am drinking is hard cider that has had a little bit of Campari added to it to make it bitter, since I can't drink IPA anymore as a result of a severe allergy to wheat. So that's what I'm up to. What were you guys drinking?
Wait, did you develop a wheat allergy later in life, or did you?
No, I believe I had it for a long time, but I discovered it late in life. Oh,
my
terrible.
diet is 100% wheat and carbs, so I sympathize.
Have you tested yourself to see whether or not you're sensitive?
No, I would rather die.
Oh.
That's how I want to go out, just eating. I'm just
eating
drinking Blue Moon. I'm actually going to get another Blue Moon. I'll be right back. Oh, no, wait, do we have a break coming up, or should I get my Blue Moon now?
Elizabeth, how long does he have to grab a beer?
You have 1 minute and 55 seconds.
Can you do it?
That should do it. I'm going to run to the bathroom, too. I'll be right back, though.
All right.
I'll be quick.
Hold it, George.
So, yeah, he could save a little time. I have found that if you break the top off of a bottle of beer and you just drink it that way, that'll save you 15 seconds.
That's good for you. I was drinking, by the way, a Toronto, which is a cocktail I recently discovered, which is a combination of mostly whiskey. It's supposed to be rye, but I was short on rye, so it was bourbon and rye mixed, along with orange bitters, Fernet Branca, and a little bit of maple syrup.
Who is Fernet Branca?
Fernet Branca is a powerfully interesting Italian bitter concoction made of lots of herbs. I described the flavor of Fernet Branca as if you were to take the syrup of Coca-Cola, take all the sugar out and put in a lot of mint. That's kind of what it ends up doing. It's very difficult to find good ways to use it, and the Toronto is the way to go. It has a 4-to-1 ratio of everything to whiskey, and then the everything else is a mixture of maple syrup and Branca, or Fernet Branca, I should say. It's supposed to be an Italian digestive, but it's hard to drink straight. It's good with a little bit of agave nectar in bubbly water, just a little Fernet Branca, a little agave nectar, and top off with bubble water. And it's actually pretty good. It's almost like a minty Coke if you do that. And unlike other cordials, Fernet Branca weighs in at like 40% alcohol, so it'll get you there.
I consider this perfectly on topic in light of the proximity of the 2020 election.
I was drinking a drink named after Canada, to which we should all flee. Just kidding. There's not going to be any escape from the incoming woke world order.
Canada won't let us in.
No, they wouldn't.
We're Americans, and they know we've flubbed the pandemic.
Yeah, we kind of did.
Yeah,
I've decided we're taking it on the chin now, though, and pray or something for that.
Taking it on the chin, it means nothing if it doesn't also cover your nose.
That's right. That is true. You can breathe it in, and don't rub your eyes.
No, I think actually I have yet to see. Initially there was a lot of concern about the fomites, the transmission from surfaces, and I think what we have learned is that an overwhelming percentage is actually airborne and aerosolized virus. Hey, Elizabeth, do you have questions for us from Democracy AI?
I do, yes. So the most popular question that we'll start with is, I live in Los Angeles. If Biden is elected and LA experiences what Portland has gone through, how do you expect Biden would respond?
Who is that to?
I think this is generally for everybody. It's not addressed to anyone specifically.
Anybody?
Let's go with Jesse.
I think if things got bad, he would probably send in the National Guard. He's not gonna. No president is gonna let a major city go up in flames. I don't think it's. Look again. I think there's. I think the media has underplayed some of the unrest this summer. I'm just not sure why this person is. Has there been anything particularly bad in LA recently? Are they just worried in general? I'm not. I think Biden would. But these are both people with strong pro-police law enforcement background. So I think they would do what they have to do. I just hope they wouldn't. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I have to say, I'm certainly concerned about what would happen, and I think what none of us know is the difference between the pre-election environment and the post-election environment. But I think there's a very real hazard based on what we've seen unfold so far, especially on the West Coast, that the discipline that you're expecting, Jesse, would not manifest itself. And whether that's because these people have sympathies that you don't anticipate, or because they cynically are going to stand down police forces because they don't like the political blowback, it's a little hard to say. But I have to say, as somebody who lives in one of these cities, I'm quite concerned about it.
I find it very difficult to answer because there are a lot of variables that are difficult to assess. Certainly what we faced over the past year or over the past several months is watching Trump nod in the direction of sending in the National Guard and immediately being attacked as a obvious fascist for trying to restore order to cities that actually were burning. And so he was placed into this trap, this decision dilemma, where he either had to look weak and let the cities burn, or try to let the governors or the mayors or whatever it happens to be take care of it, or he had to send in actual National Guard reinforcements or law and order in that form, and then be accused of being an all-out Nazi-style military enabling fascist, which the narrative was very clear. He's now sending in the military against American citizens who are exercising their right to protest. And this narrative was accepted very sympathetically across a wide swath, not necessarily a majority, but a wide swath of people on the left who were desperately misinformed by a media apparatus that was not interested in telling us the truth about these situations whatsoever. We watched a man on national television in front of a burning building saying the protests were mostly peaceful. So I'd be very, very concerned that Biden is going to face the exact same tiger. If he's put into that position, I don't know what Trump would do where he's not courting a second election. I don't know what Biden would do either, knowing especially that he's definitely going to make sympathetic statements toward the movement that's doing these things. So I have very little confidence that there will be a lot of law and order for the entirety of 2021, regardless of who wins.
But we hold on. We have a concrete example of this. The National Guard was deployed to Kenosha The mayor received no backlash. No one called anyone a Nazi. I mean, I don't know. Why should we resort to hypotheticals when, like, we have the real-life National Guard really was deployed to real-life Kenosha? Nothing happened. It was fine. It calmed down. So why isn't that an example of how maybe some of these fears are overblown?
Wasn't the National Guard supposed to be deployed to Portland and Seattle? And didn't the governors and local municipalities say, stand down, don't do it? And certainly the narrative was that it's fascist. So maybe they'd give Biden a pass on it, and maybe they wouldn't. That's the question. That's the open question. Certainly, if they started trying to stop the protests, positively stop the protests, you're going to hear that radical base start agitating in that direction. And the question is, what will they do? We have some sense of what they will do under Trump. They will go fucking ballistic. That's what they will do. They will fascist, blah, 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 Nazi, da, da, da. They're going to go full to the hilt. What will they do under Biden? It's much less clear what they're going to do under Biden. Are they going to be emboldened that somebody who's sympathetic to their cause has been elected, that their agitations over the summer seem to have worked? And are they going to just keep pressing the pedal to the metal? Or are they going to say, oh, our guy, let's go ahead and moderate?
But how is he like the biggest faux pas you can commit is to say rioting is bad. People will dogpile you online. The guy David Shore got fired from that shitty Civis Analytics for saying that violent protest is bad. But Biden just came out and said that. He just came out and denounced the rioters. So he's not, Antifa does not like Biden. The radical left doesn't like Biden. So again, it's like you just make these statements that he's their guy or that he sympathizes with them. And except in this very vague pandering way, like he'll talk about structural racism or he'll use equity, I just don't see any evidence of that.
Yeah, he'll pander about structural racism or equity, or he'll put a dog whistle on the ticket as his vice presidential nominee to signal that he's actually on board. I mean, there's a lot going on here. And obviously, I don't know what's going to happen. It's possible that as soon as the election is passed, the Democratic Party will find its testicles and start standing up for the rule of law. But
Biden just came out a night or two, just last night. He just came out at potential political cost and denounced the rioters. It's as simple as that.
No, it isn't as simple as that. I believe what you'll find is that he is coming out on both sides of the issue so that each side will find what it needs to find in order to justify supporting him. This is a purely political game.
Is that bad that he was sympathetic to the mentally ill guy with the knife who got killed? Isn't that a sad thing?
No, but the dog whistling part is very troubling.
He said that the guy is a black life that mattered. That's explicitly in the statement, which is a direct nod to the movement that's encouraging people to go ballistic when a black person dies at the hands of police for any reason. By the way, we were talking about standards of evidence with Biden. Earlier, Jesse, you said that George Floyd was killed. No, George Floyd died. We haven't established that he was killed. And we certainly
George Floyd was killed.
Died.
Wait a second. How do you know that?
How do I know that he was killed?
Yes. Have you looked at the evidence?
From watching the video with the dude's knee.
Oh, you don't know anything from the video. Okay.
I don't know anything from the video. The video provides no evidentiary value.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't provide any evidentiary value, but I'm saying it doesn't provide the ability to conclude what caused his death. What you have is a situation. I mean, do you know that George Floyd asked to be placed on the ground, that he refused to get in the vehicle? He asked to be placed on the ground, that he said he couldn't breathe before he was on the ground, that the drugs in his system were consistent with an overdose? Now, I'm not saying there wasn't a tragedy there. I'm not saying that I liked the way the police behaved. However, I am saying, as I said on Joe Rogan long before the evidence was out, this was a complex arrest. And the idea that we all think we know that we saw a killing is just preposterous. We don't know. This is what you need a court for, because there was a lot of stuff going on in that arrest, from the physiological stuff in his system to police policy to his own behavior prior to being on the ground. All of these things have a role to play. And frankly, I'm shocked that Americans think they can look at this arrest and one piece of video and have a sense that they know what took place.
Well, no, I'm saying the preponderance of evidence suggests he was killed. So I use that language. It wasn't some unthinking reaction. I mean,
a preponderance of the evidence that you happen to have seen. but I don't know whether or not you saw the compiled body cam video from all of the various cams that were running. If you saw the entire transcript of those things, if you saw the autopsy report and its point about the drugs in his system, the fact is, I'm not saying I know what happened. I don't know. But I am saying it's a complex arrest, and the fact that anybody thinks they know what happened without experts telling them what these things mean is overstepping.
Okay. I happen to believe, and again, I know it was more complicated than some people made it out to be. I don't think it was that more complicated. I'm comfortable using the language that he was killed.
Well, look, between you and me, even if he was killed, you shouldn't be comfortable with that language. We have a tradition in this country about withholding that judgment and saying that somebody, that it was an alleged killing, something like this, until it has been established.
I'm not writing this for a newspaper where there's like legal issues. I'm not making a legal claim. I'm saying
no. This is even worse. You're talking into a camera in front of fellow Americans who have concluded that they've seen a murder and are actually engaged in violence to counteract it, when in fact the arrest itself was complex. So we all have an obligation to be extra careful in this case, beyond our journalistic obligations if we have them, as you do, and just simply as Americans not to throw gasoline on the fire.
I mean, I think there's a certain political correctness there where you're saying you can't say X because X could lead to Y. I've encountered that, particularly in my writing about gender issues. You're not allowed to say something you think is true because then a bad person could do a bad thing. You're saying I shouldn't say he was killed, even though I believe it, because hypothetically that could throw fuel on a rioting flare.
No.
But I still think it's important to say what I think is true.
I'm saying that the evidence that I have seen, which I believe to be credible, suggests there's a possibility he had a heart attack, in which case what you think you saw isn't the cause of his death. Now, I don't know that to be the case, but given that there's a possibility that he had a heart attack, right? The fact that he was saying he couldn't breathe before he was ever on the ground, before anyone's knee was on his neck, should cause you to say, actually, I want to be extra careful in this case.
I think if he had a heart attack and then a cop lay him down and put his knee on the back of his head for 8 minutes and didn't give him treatment during that critical span, I'd be comfortable saying that he was killed.
Well, it is not clear, even in that case. It is only credible to say that he was killed if it is obvious that treatment that he should have been given would have saved him. And I don't think you know that.
I mean, we're dealing in sort of double hypotheticals here, but yeah,
we're not, because my point isn't that he wasn't killed. My point is that a reasonable person has to be agnostic. That the whole point of our system is to remain agnostic until we've actually established beyond a reasonable doubt that he was killed before we say it, even when it's obvious.
Okay. I mean, people can watch the same video and disagree. I think that
I hope they will watch the video, but I also hope they will watch the compiled body cam videos, and that they will read the transcript of those videos, and that they will read the autopsy report, and they will recognize, you know what? None of us are experts enough to evaluate this in isolation.
What would you say, Jesse, if a similar video were to come out, let's say that Biden wins the election, just to go with the whole hypothetical, was in the original question that led us here. And so it's now, let's say, I don't know, March next year, Biden's president, everything's gone according to plan, everything's good, moderate Democrat, everybody's happy. And a nearly identical video surfaces from LA. Are you going to say the guy was killed? Are you going to say he was murdered? Or are you going to say the guy died? Let's wait and see what happens. Let's see what the preponderance of evidence shows.
I mean, there's cases where, okay, there was a kid in DC killed. He was holding a gun when the cop ran up on him. I think the kid was on the other side of a car. The cop saw a kid holding a gun out and shot him. In that case, there's a technical, literal sense in which the cop killed the kid, but I think it was a justified shooting, because my own views on policing are very progressive and liberal. I don't think we can expect police to not shoot at someone who is holding a gun, so it would depend on the specifics.
No. My hypothetical is it's the exact same story as George Floyd unfolds in LA next March under a Biden administration, but that's really irrelevant. The exact same story unfolds. Do you come forward and say, look at this murder? look at this killing? Or do you say, here's a case of a death that involved police officers and a black individual. Let's await the requisite evidence, the body cam footage, as it were.
On social media, I would say nothing, because I think the biggest mistake journalists make is feeling they need to instantly chime in with a maximalist position on everything. In this case, with the benefit of I have watched those other videos. I know that this was not as simple a case as people made it out to be. My view is that the preponderance of evidence suggests it's fair to say that he was killed by the officer. I think
that's fine to me. The question becomes, though, do you recognize that saying that it's a killing or a murder, especially, is going to set Los Angeles on fire?
Yeah, because this already happened. In Minneapolis, there was looting because a kid shot himself, and rumors spread that it was been a police shooting. This comes down to responsible social media rumor hygiene, which I've written about and think is very important, but that's sort of a different issue.
All right. Pause. Elizabeth, do you have a next question for us?
I do, yes.
Awesome.
And I'm reframing this one a bit. So Unity 2020 voted for the Unity ticket and drafted Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw to take the White House and govern as a team. So the question is, Jesse, would the Unity ticket have been preferable to Biden for you? And James, would the Unity ticket have been preferable to Trump?
James can go first.
Okay. I actually find that to be complicated because I would have to try to weigh out the odds of many things. One is, what is the odds of it winning? And in particular, for my relevance, what are the odds of it winning Tennessee? Because Tennessee is pretty freaking reliably going to vote Republican almost no matter what.
Wait. Pause. Elizabeth, you have to clarify for us. Is the intent of the question, as far as you can tell, to determine whether or not it would change Jesse and James' vote? Or is the question Jesse James vote? Or is the question, would this be preferable to the election of the people that both Jesse and James voted for?
I believe it was the latter.
The latter. So it's not a question of the strategy. It's a question of ascending to the office.
Correct.
So, okay, that's fine. I also find that to be a difficult decision because it would depend upon. Now, Grant, let me say outright that I would very much rather that Unity ticket be in office than either of the two people who are running under normal circumstances. But my decision is entirely based upon one and only one factor, which is what's going to happen in the administrative state under the considerable amount of woke pressure that we currently see happening in the country. So I would have to assess in that regard. But that said, I would definitely prefer a Unity ticket as explained with Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw to either of Biden or Trump under normal circumstances, and I would be torn and have to do a great deal of analysis to work it out, given that Trump has explicitly stood up against critical race theory in the federal government and related contractors.
Jesse?
This is about, I lost connection. It's the electability of Gabbard and Crenshaw versus the alternative?
No. It's if you imagine them ascending to the office, winning the election, do you prefer a unity arrangement with Gabbard and Crenshaw where they govern by consensus as a team, or do you prefer Biden?
Oh, I prefer Biden and Harris just because ideologically they're on all this stuff we're not talking about, like, taxes and the environment and stuff like that. I just trust them much more. And I do have, Gabbard hasn't always gotten a fair shake, but I do, some of the serious stuff does squick me out a little bit. So yeah, for me, that'd be easy, but that's just pure ideology on my part.
It's not fair, Bret, that you actually did vote for Gabbard, so you already gave yours away.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did. I must tell you, I was very pleased when Gabbard and Crenshaw got the nomination of the Unity Party, or not party, but the Unity movement. However, that has nothing to do with why I voted Gabbard as a write-in. I just thought Gabbard showed incredible integrity and bravery and exactly the kind of character traits that I think would make an excellent president, and the fact that she also happened to be on the ticket we proposed to draft was an accident. All right. Elizabeth, are we at the end of our expected questions on this phase, or do you have more?
I have one more question.
All right.
For everyone. So this goes to all three of you. What is the best and worst of what will happen if your candidate is elected?
Best and worst. The best for me, I would love some sort of incremental improvement on stuff like, lower the Medicare age or something. I'd prefer like a national healthcare system. There's major political obstacles to that. I think it's unlikely. The best possible outcome would be, progress on climate change, lowered Medicare age. The worst that could happen, I'm always worried about backlash. Like 2 years in, there's typically a backlash for a new president in terms of the midterm election. So it could be a situation where like the Democrats control all three branches for a very brief span, don't get anything done, and then we're just back to this total gridlock. But again, I'm a fairly ardent progressive, so to me, Democratic control of everything is good, and I think it would mostly generate net positive policy.
And before we let you go, did you answer? I don't think you did answer the question on what you think the chances are that you've got this wrong. And by wrong, I mean that if Biden is elected, it will result in a large increase in the power of the woke movement.
So I'm not trying to be slippery here, but the three of us have had trouble agreeing on our terms, like what it means for the woke movement to become more powerful. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that in terms of like Twitter bullshit and violent protest and the other stuff I don't like, I'm a huge fan of nonviolent protest. Trump's election would, at least in the short term, make everything much, much worse. All the people I hate on Twitter, all the most hackish leftist journalists, it would embolden all of them. I could see marginal stuff. I really disagree with this idea that the Department of Education is going to be taken over by wokies. I'm trying to give you a percentage.
Yep.
I think I'm less humble than James, not 30%, 5 or 10%.
Okay. Still, that's great.
I have hubris.
Well, let's put it this way. I think that's actually a huge triumph, and that if everybody heading into Thanksgiving or whatever were to use this exercise, and they should aspire to the level of achievement that we've got here, where you both have, at least in double digits, the chances that you've got it wrong. And frankly, I think in an environment this noisy, that's very healthy. So anyway, good on you both. All right, James, you want to answer the question?
Not really. So I think that should Trump win, the best that we can hope for is not very good. I think that we buy ourselves 4 years, hopefully, of breathing room. And that in that span of breathing room, we are able to, this is again the best, this is a best case scenario. He is able to continue the work, and his departments underneath him are able to continue the work to start removing the pernicious effects of wokeness without outright Viktor Orban style bans from our governmental apparatuses, and to provide defenses for our educational, our workplace, basically everywhere else that you would need, whether it's under Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, Department of State even needs some rethinking here. And in the space of that breathing room, I hope the best case scenario is we're going to see a lot of agitation. We're going to see a lot of unrest. We're going to see a lot of anger. We're going to see a lot of screaming, not at the sky, but at each other, and that it wakes enough people up at a critical mass of Americans who remember that we are Americans together. And they decide that in 4 years, we want something sane and better for all of us. And that is a return to beliefs in objectivity, reliance upon science, solving our shared problems as rigorously as possible, focusing on equality before the law, and so on and so forth. Waking up away from all of this pernicious, divisive nonsense. The worst, civil war. A civil war breaks out. And if that's not the worst, we survive like the second worst, the penultimate worst, or maybe it's worse. I actually don't know. I'm torn between an all-out civil war, and in 4 years, we either have a completely supercharged, super invigorated woke left, versus possibly a weak Republican or a completely invigorated woke left against a horrifying super Trump who is a proper right-wing authoritarian monster who has a very good chance of winning. Or we have that same right-wing monster running against a weak Democratic nominee, but they're very charismatic and they're very something. So in other words, a 4-year reprieve before a lurch into totalitarianism or authoritarianism, one way or the other, in another horrific choice election in 4 years. So I think the stakes are actually quite high. And this takes out, this is just the America context. The all-out worst, to be completely honest with you, if you look in the global context and you look at these things coming out of things like the World Economic Forum about the Great Reset, is that we get set on an irrevocable path to an unaccountable global tyranny that accepts intersectionality as its operating model, it accepts equity on a global scale as its operating model, and that we are wholly unable to hold it to account from within any particular nation. And that is, of course, going to be fascist because it'll be tied in with these 1,000 or so big corporations that have already signed on to it, and these major media platforms that have also already signed on to it.
But never mind.
So
Sorry.
That's my worst case scenario. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just add, worst case wise, a variation on the last one you presented, James, which is that basically we hobble ourselves. We in the United States fail to understand the special role we play in the world, that we fail to understand what it is that makes us special, which is structural pluralism. That is to say, a constitutional structure that actually sidelines things like ancestry and prioritizes the cooperation between people of different ancestry that has made for unique American dynamism, and that in sidelining ourselves, basically taking ourselves out of this global competition, that we leave a power vacuum that gets filled with something that returns us to a prior state of human affairs where nothing matters more than who your ancestors are. And I think that's a very real possibility and a very frightening one that I hope we can avoid. All right, here's my suggestion at this point. I think we need to free you both. And in order to do that, I think somehow we have to find a means of emphasizing to the audience that although we have disagreed here fiercely, that we are all unified in recognizing the country as important, as essential to the well-being of those who belong in it, whether they're happy with its current configuration or not, and a recognition that our disagreements are not personal and that what unites us far exceeds what divides us. So I've said my piece.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. All right. James, are you on board?
I'm out of beverages, but I'll. Yes.
You can raise a glass.
Give me one Gentile l'chaim.
I don't know how to say that. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Do it again.
You can do it.
L'chaim.
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 Close.
Not
All right.
bad.
To your
Or
health.
Yeah. Nazadrovia.
Mazel tov will do. Good. All right. So with that, we will turn you loose. We will be back in a few minutes. Yes, thanks very much for participating. And I must say, beyond participating, thanks for taking the risk of being candid about your political position in an environment where that is indeed a very dangerous thing to do. We really do appreciate that, and I consider that an important piece of evidence of your deep patriotism in both your cases. So thanks, guys.
Thanks. I'll add that as you began, you've broken bread with me. I also have with Jesse, and I hope to do that again with both of you at some point in the future. So certainly
Tracy Morgan made a surprise
appearance. That's right, Tracy
That's a
Morgan.
Story for another day.
All right, to breaking bread in person when that is again possible.
With Tracy Morgan.
With Tracy Morgan if he's available.
Bye, guys.
Okay, we're going to take a break for, I believe, 5 minutes. Is that correct, Elizabeth?
Yep. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Then we'll be back, and we will wrap up this season of Unity. Okay. Be well, everyone.
Okay.
Hey folks, we are back with the first Unity bonfire. I have with me Elizabeth Sweet and Ryan Bennett. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
So Elizabeth and
Hello.
Ryan are leaders of our volunteer movement. And before we go any further, I think at this point, just prior to the election, I think we need to thank our vast army of volunteers who have done such amazing things for the Unity movement and have really set it in motion in a way that I think places us quite well for the future. I certainly hope so. So thanks to all of you who have participated. I should probably also say that this is not the end of Unity. We have discovered that we are all committed to rescuing the Republic from the thing that we believe jeopardizes it now as much as it ever has, and we will be continuing Unity going forward. What does that mean? Well, one thing it means is that we have, in some sense, learned important lessons from this initial foray into creating the Unity movement. What have we learned? In part, that although it is excellent and rewarding to have participated in a pure grassroots effort with no money involved, that limits us in some sense. And to the extent that we are serious about challenging the duopoly and restoring the structures of governance that allow this democratic republic to function, that we are going to avail ourselves of different tools going forward. So if you are paying attention to the Unity movement and you are wondering what comes next, rest assured that the Unity movement is going to be back, and that it is going to do so with new tools and an increased capacity to strategically navigate this difficult landscape. Okay, Elizabeth and Ryan, welcome to our bonfire. How are you folks?
As well as could be expected.
As well as can be expected. That is a very cryptic answer, Ryan.
A bit of trepidation after following the fireworks that preceded us.
I should say There were fireworks, but I'm very pleased that no one was killed. So our safety record is intact. I think that's excellent.
In full compliance with OSHA.
I would certainly hope so. Elizabeth, how are you?
Doing well. Yeah, that was a great conversation that preceded us. And I just want to add one thing to what you said, Bret, that, so Ryan and I are part of a leadership team at Unity, and there are so many people that have got us this far and who have put so many hours and so much work into making this what it is and what it's become. And we might not have gotten the White House, we might have suspended our plan, but we achieved so much. And I really hope that everyone out there who volunteered and stayed tuned and, came to the campfires when they could. I hope that everyone has a sense of pride and really committing to something that is at the end of the day, true in a sense. And by true, I mean, it's not about choosing a side. It's not about serving some narrative that isn't yours. It's about doing something that you believe in. And I really want to thank everyone for doing that with us for this summer and this fall. It's been a wild ride. So really, thank you. Thank you all.
That's very well said. I must say I agree that we've, in a sense, discovered something important, and that, in effect, the Unity movement has pioneered the reinvention of being patriotic Americans together in spite of differences. And we're not the only ones doing it, but I must say it's very rewarding to have seen a large group of dedicated people willing to spend their time and their effort on behalf of other Americans and the Republic that we all care so deeply about.
Yeah, and I would add to that one of the recurring themes that came up over and over again as we were working on different projects, as the plan unfolded and pivots happened, was this sense of camaraderie and the joy inherent in finding out that you're not alone in observing the nature of this problem. Because it's so easy in social media echo chambers when you're sitting around at a cocktail party or a bar or a cafe, when everyone is spouting, whatever flavor of partisan hackery is popular in that room. It's so easy to see the emperor with no clothes on, but be afraid to speak it. And one of the greatest points of joy and pride in pursuing this, even though we were ultimately unsuccessful, was the ability to be in a room where we all saw the cards on the table, where we all saw what was coming. And I would encourage everyone to not lose that and not think that just because this particular version of a plan didn't work, that they can't continue to both network with each other, that the people that you found through Unity, and also, take heart in the fact that it's not as rare as you might think to find people that see the state of affairs and are maybe just a little too scared to say it at the cocktail party. You'll learn to see the signals of the person who maybe demurs when someone makes the party line, and reach out to them, take the chances to find those connections in the networks around you.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And at some level, we know what you're looking for, which is a room in which you're not afraid that advancing an argument in favor of some direction that we might head is going to come back to haunt you, that you're not going to be punished. And all of the interaction that we have had with each other in Unity so far has reflected this. Nobody punished anybody else. I don't think I saw it one time. And that's really an accomplishment in an environment where outside of Unity, it was a regular occurrence to see people demonized and falsely portrayed over opinions that they had arrived at earnestly. Okay, so here's a question. You guys were participants and leaders in the Unity movement from the beginning. What did you do with your votes now that Unity suspended its plan? I don't know who...
Elizabeth, you want to go first? You want me to take it?
I'll go first. And I'll start by saying that I haven't voted yet because I'm in a position where I can vote in person. So I'm going to do that on Tuesday. And I'll also add that our Democracy AI audience, the people who participated and who did the onboarding questions, 85% of people are voting and 50% are voting in person, which I think that surprised me. I thought more people would do a mail-in ballot. So that likely means that, either you are still going to vote or maybe you've early voted in person. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But like I said, I'm going to vote on Tuesday, and it's funny, we were talking about this before, and I am almost nervous to say that I'm not 100% decided yet on who I'm voting for. And I know that is, unheard of these days. And I'm told that person doesn't exist. But here I am, not 100%. But what I do know is that I can't vote for Trump and I can't vote for Biden, not with my heart, not with my mind, not with any part of me, not really. And so what I would say 80-20 going to do is write in Tulsi Gabbard. And that's because she embodies the values of a leader that I want, that I could aspire to. She inspires me, and I think that she would make a great president of the United States of America. And so I think that's who I'm voting for. There are other candidates that are out there who could do a good job too, a great job. And we don't have those choices on the ballot this year, I don't think. So I'll take a pen. I don't even know how it works in the booth. Do you write it in? I don't know how that works, actually.
I think it's darts. You have to throw the dart and hit the candidate of your choice.
And
I just got a bow and arrow.
Right.
Maybe I can I can fling it in there. So yeah, that's my line of thought right now.
Wonderful. And I don't know why you have the slightest bit of embarrassment about not being fully resolved about this. I think in some sense, the idea that there are no undecided voters is one of the most bizarre stories, right? In this situation where there's no awesome argument for either major party candidate, there ought to be lots of people who are waiting for something to tell them. And, in fact, we're seeing revelations about major party candidates even at this late hour. So the fact that other people are so resolved that they're going to be unpersuaded by evidence is a bad reflection on them. And your earnestness and your seriousness in confronting this vote, I think speaks well for you. And I wouldn't be the least bit embarrassed.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Ryan, how about you?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit at the top that if it were any other election, if it were simply a referendum on the candidates themselves, my background and my predisposition would place me at the Biden end of the spectrum insofar as I were subject to the lesser of two evils argument. So that's sort of my priors in that situation. That said, I've joked for a long time since first getting involved in Unity that for me, Unity was not an alternative to Trump or Biden. It was an alternative to lighting my ballot on fire. Now, I'm not going to do that because there are down ballot races. And what's more, as much as it's fun to entertain publicity stunts like that, I feel that would literally be a flash in the pan or a flash in the barbecue. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to sacrifice my right to participate in an election for something so transparently theatrical, although it's fun to think about and I think illustrates my frustration adequately. However, given that I come down on the Biden as lesser of two evils, but I can't in good conscience vote for either of them, I'm going to defect, but I'm not going to defect without the following precondition. I'm going to find someone who, similar to James Lindsey, views Trump as the lesser evil in this scenario. I'm going to find them in Colorado, which is where I live, and I'm going to build up enough trust with them that I trust them to defect with me. So that, number one, the rejection of the duopoly can be twofold, as I think it ought to be. And number two, such that I can both sleep well at night knowing that I've got an extra response, even for my own self, about the lesser of two evils concern, and such that both myself and the person that defect with me are both protected and together, and hopefully such that in the months and years following this election, that relationship and others like it can bloom and grow into the continuing unity movement and the continuing obligation and responsibility and duty to defect from partisan extremism. So that was a very long-winded way of avoiding the question because I still haven't given you a name. So given all those caveats and addendums, I would say that the name I find myself most likely to put on the ballot as a write-in is Justin Amash. And this is really due to the demonstrated ability. I mean, people can say a lot of things. People can say what their principles are, and then you wait 24 hours and they do something completely contrary to their stated principles. What I have observed from Justin Amash by his defection from the Republican Party to paint such a large target on his back demonstrates to me an amount of skin in the game and a devotion to escaping from the trap of partisanship that supersedes any disagreements that I might have with him about specific policies. That's just it's a shibboleth, as it were, that demonstrates to me his devotion to the principle of democratic process.
Wonderful. And I must say that name resonates with me too, as much as Justin and I aren't in the same part of the political spectrum. Our interaction with him did reveal that he was a fellow traveler in the most important sense, that he is deeply patriotic and ideological in the best sense, that he holds the values that bind Americans together at a very high level. So, I would agree. And I must say, I didn't know anything about Justin Amash before the Unity movement brought him to my attention. So the discovery that there's such a fine person willing to buck the political winds existing in our system is heartening. How many others are there that are just waiting for an opportunity to reveal their decency and their commitment? So excellent. I think it's a very wise use of your vote, and I appreciate the allusion to it sounded like vote pack or some equivalent structure. I also think these are noble efforts to figure out how to escape the hegemony of the duopoly. So, good work, both of you.
Speaking of that, if I might riff on that for a second,
sure.
I would encourage everyone who has been involved in Unity or has been Unity curious. There are more fellow travelers than you might think out there, like VotePact. There's another app called Party Line that will give you a quick quiz on your policy positions, and they'll pair you up for a chat with someone that you have one agreement with and one disagreement with, right? And this is not narrowly Trump or Biden. This is, what's your opinion on immigration, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look for them, they're not making headlines right now because the headlines are dominated by Trump and Biden. But if you take the time to keep your ear to the ground for initiatives of this flavor, you'd be surprised how many there are. And I would encourage everyone to look actively and try and involve yourself with anything that is of that spirit.
Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of people looking for the way out of the cave, and they've come up with various things, a lot of which are very clever. And my hope going forward in whatever Unity 2.0 is that we figure out how to unite all of the groups of fellow travelers together so that we can pursue what really matters with the maximum power, the power that comes from the large number of people who are in search of that answer. All right, to close this out, I think we ought to confront some questions, and we can't go deeply into them, but I think we need to talk about them a little bit. What did we learn from our foray into Unity? Either of you have a good sense?
We learned quite a bit. I've been rambling a bit, though. I want to let Elizabeth take this.
No, okay. Well, you know, I've learned a lot, and two of my biggest takeaways at this point are that, and this goes to Ryan's point earlier, you know, you're not alone in thinking that things are crazy, and that, you know, different flavors of crazy are not like, you don't have to decide between two bad things. You can choose the third path, and you can do that in a way that you're proud of, and you can take pride in that. I'm sort of losing my train of thought here, because what I've really learned from all of this is that you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be able to be honest with yourself and the people in your life and the people who you talk to every day. And if you're not able to be honest with yourself, you need to figure out why and what is going on and how you can get there. Because at the end of the day, we need to see the humanity in every single person that we engage with. And I have met more people this summer through Unity than I ever thought I could meet during a pandemic. I mean, I haven't really thought about it before, to be honest, but I think that it's really important to know that there are people out there who want the world to be better, and who want the world to be better for other people and not just for themselves. So this is all kind of theoretical and a little bit out there, but I really think that unity and honesty and courage are the things that I'm going to take away most from this experience. And really working together as a team. You know, I've said before that Unity is a proof of concept, and it really is. It really is. So now I'm rambling. So someone else take it, but
I can pick up on that. Something very concrete that was told to me by a fellow volunteer when I first onboarded, and that sort of grew in my mind, was the conspicuous discrepancy between the types of conversations you're able to have one-on-one versus in groups of people or publicly, especially on social media, that, you know, subject to Ash conformity and preference falsification and this emperor has new clothes phenomenon, just about anyone sitting across a dinner table from you one-on-one they will admit in a heartbeat that they would prefer a realistic third option. And no one will say so publicly. And something that's downstream of that strategically is that, you know, at the dawn of the internet age, you know, a lot of people will know of John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace from 1996. That was this very beautiful vision of, you know, a civilization of the mind on the internet, where people could have discussions outside of the shackles of the traditional Overton window. And, you know, in large part in the last 24 years, that has not been borne out, right? We find ourselves in a media environment online that is in the opposite direction of the worst of partisan hackery in 1996. So and this is something that I saw with Yang's campaign. I saw it somewhat with Bernie, although Bernie was far more successful in 2015 and 2016, is that there's a hunch among those that wish to build a grassroots challenge to the status quo that social media is going to be like, that's your silver bullet, right? That is the environment that frees you from the constraints that were normally imposed by traditional media and giant bureaucracies and giant monopolies on information. And now there are conditions under which that's true, but for something which is bucking both trends at the same time, Unity found very concretely that traditional social media, Twitter and Facebook and the like, is incredibly hostile. And not only, I mean, we can talk about Twitter banning the accounts and banning the links, but that's not even what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at is that the message of unification, even abstractly, the cliche is, if it bleeds, it leads. And that coupled with the advertising business model, which wants to maximize engagement. A lot of people will be aware of the Social Dilemma, which just came out on Netflix. There are systematic pushes and nudges in the direction of having us be antagonistic towards each other. Add to that the fact that the one thing that we can control about all of our collective social feeds is who we follow or who we're friends with. So for psychological safety, we trim all of our social networks for maximum conformity. Is disastrous. Now, just last night, I went on a different social network that some people will be familiar with, but most won't. It's called Nextdoor. And Nextdoor is a social network for your neighborhood. And it has an interesting constraint, which is that you can't unfollow or unfriend someone because there is no followers or friends. It's based on your geographical location. So short of moving, you are stuck with your neighbors, which is actually reflective of the real world. So the conversation on Nextdoor doesn't tend to be super political. It tends to be asking each other for de-icing salt, or asking if someone's got a lawnmower I can borrow, or will someone give me a ride to pick up my medication. And those little bits of human connection and cooperation, it sounds Mr. Rogers to say so, and because I'm talking about neighbors, it probably is. But I think those are what we need to be optimizing for, and those are the sorts of places a unity movement could catch fire. This is all a very long-winded way of saying ones and zeros are great, and digital technology is a tool. Social media, Twitter and Facebook are not the places where a real challenge is going to be levied.
If I could pick up on that really
Please.
quick, because Ryan, you've helped me kind of gather my thoughts from the air. I think that what I've learned most through Unity is how important it is to humanize everyone that you talk to, everyone that you come into contact with. It's to find their humanity and understanding that they are people. And I think that is going to be the most important thing that we do moving forward, is really distilling what makes a person and why you should respect them, even if you disagree with them on every single thing possible. Because they could be your neighbor. You never know.
Yeah. All right. This is very important, and I think it points us towards the proper way to close this season, for lack of a better term, out, which is, if it is possible to convey to those who have been paying attention to the Unity movement that there is something very real about the discovery that across all kinds of divides that we have been told are uncrossable, inviolable, that human beings who share a great deal of our understanding of the world exist, and that we are being falsely divided from them. That's a very important recognition. And I don't know how easy this is to put together in practice, but the simple fact that a call to challenge that which falsely divides us has resulted in all sorts of good people gathering and revealing themselves. And that, if there's one truth about what goes on inside the unity movement, it's that nobody is paying close attention to where you came from. The important thing is that you're there, and that you're there for the right reason. And, wouldn't that be marvelous if all of our, holiday tables looked like that? If we didn't care so much about what party the people that we were there with were from, and we recognize that all the parties are flawed, and that it just doesn't matter, that the basic values are the thing that unites us. That would be a huge upgrade, I think, to our lifestyle as modern Americans. All right, should we take a question or two, Elizabeth, from the Democracy AI before we close out this bonfire?
That's a great idea. Oh, let's see. So we've got a team on the back end, and somebody has just fired the question, what is the most memorable discovery while talking with someone recently? And while people are answering that question, I will go back to something that someone else from the team asked. What did you learn from the Unity experience? Here we go. We've got a great team working on the back. I think that's Chris. Thank you. So what did you learn from the Unity experience? The most popular among all respondents was, I'm not alone. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple and so central. And I think in some ways, the greatest tool that those who would divide us in order to maintain power have is the ability to isolate us. So you can't be certain that anyone will be honest with you. You can't be certain that they will stand by you. And that causes people to conform to all kinds of nonsense. And so to the extent that you can discover a path to recognize that you're really not alone, and, if there's one thing that can unite you with other people, it's the recognition that not being alone is central, and that there are others seeking the same thing. So that's really, if there is a route to the grassroots, that would be it, I would argue.
Yeah, agreed. And, the second most popular thing is, I learned that I'm not alone at the most critical time for me to learn that. So it echoes itself.
Yes, well, I hope that can propagate itself into whatever chaos is coming in the aftermath of the election, because if we can recognize the humanity in other Americans, maybe we can stave off the worst possibilities.
That's really all we can do with such terrible options in front of us, is to just look at each other and see what's good. Honestly. Let's see. Okay, so for this last question, what is the most memorable discovery while talking with someone recently? And the most popular answer to that was that partisanship has grown to crazy levels. Yeah. I think that's clear. And there's a difference between advantage and privilege.
Yeah, so I have a formulation for this, which I use, which I've actually heard other people use too. Maybe they've arrived there separately, but there's a difference between privilege and unearned privilege, and the degree to which checking, even what seems like earned privilege may partly be unearned by virtue of the fact that the field of competitors is limited. That this is the analysis that we need to do in order to correct the problems that I think wokeness unfairly challenges, which is to say, there are real bits of unfairness, massive ones inside of our system. And the real question is, what's the admixture? to what extent did I earn what I have, and to what extent did earning it get easier because some fraction of the population is frozen out of the competition, right? We have to do that honestly in order to properly address the genuine inequalities of opportunity that exist without pursuing equality of outcome, which is a dangerous perversion of the principle. All right, maybe we have arrived at the end of this first Unity bonfire. Am I right about that?
I believe so.
Okay. Are there s'mores, or is this just the end point?
There are s'mores. There are s'mores, and Desmond's been waiting for a long time now, I think. So thank you. Please head over to s'mores at campfiresmores.articlesofunity.org to hang out with your fellow patriots.
All right. Ryan, I see that guitar behind you. Is there something you want to play us out with?
Oh, not on your life.
Oh.
However, I would actually. Elizabeth and I were conversing earlier, looking for a word. We had this moment where there was a word on the tip of our tongue and I didn't find it, but I found myself back on an old blog I used to frequent called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, where someone had made up a bunch of new words with beautiful description, and I'd like to encourage the audience and us all to cultivate a sense of sonder, which is one of these words, and I'll read you the definition here. Sonder, the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherited craziness. An epic story that continues invisibly around you like an anthill sprawling deep underground, with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives that you'll never know existed, in which you might appear only once, as an extra sipping coffee in the background, as a blur of traffic passing on the highway, as a lighted window at dusk. Let's try and cultivate that realization of the humanity and inner lives of all of our fellow citizens and all of our fellow humans.
That's beautiful. That seems like the root of the deepest form of empathy is the recognition that everybody else is living such a vivid life as you are, even if you can't tap into it directly. All right. Well, thank you both. Thank you to all of the people who volunteered for the Unity movement and all the people who've been paying attention to us and rooting for us in spite of the odds. And we will see you soon enough with sharpened tools and a new approach to rescuing this beautiful democratic republic of ours. All right. Thanks, everyone,
Amen.
And be well.
Thanks.
Good night.